Hari Hari. So rather than my usual presentation every weekend on the 108 key verses of the Bhagavad Gita, I'm going to do something different this weekend and share my personal opinions, and realizations on the issue of the Vaisnavi Diksha Guru issue. But before going into that, I want to preface by saying what we have to do is remove from this conversation words and labels like male chauvinism, sexism, feminism, and things like that. We have to remove those terms and labels for the simple reason, it's a very, very American thing to label something, to label it, tar it, feather it, and then hang it. We've got to stop doing that and remove those terms, because what they do is, besides tarring, feathering, and hanging something, is that it kills the debate. It hangs the debate. It hangs the necessity, not the necessity. The necessity is there, but it kills the space necessary to have this discussion. Because the necessity for the discussion, the absolute critical necessity for this discussion cannot be overemphasized. So let's get away from, we have to remove those terms from the discussion so that we can have the discussion itself. Now we all know the issue. If you're listening and watching this video, you certainly have. And we've seen the resolution, we've seen the GBC's 2-3 dozen page explanation of the resolution. But I'm sharing my opinion of it now because there was a video created and presented by His Holiness Sivarama Swami. And though if you know Sivarama Swami, he is brilliant. You have to watch that video. He's off a number of books, and if you've read the Krishna Sangati by Maharaj, he is brilliant at researching, understanding, and putting time and effort in realizing the subject matter. He doesn't have an opinion and just throw up an opinion out. Maharaj does not do that. Those of us who are familiar with his writings, we know that. He does not, this is my opinion, and just spout off extemporaneously. He deeply goes into understanding an issue from a number of different perspectives, and he endeavors, and indeed does, realize for himself the content of the issue at hand. And he did the same for this video. So please turn me off and listen to, take the time to hear what Maharaj is talking about. Take the time to understand what Maharaj is talking about. Take the time to understand the realizations behind what Maharaj is talking about. Very, very important. And then I want to say, this is, again, my opinion, my personal realizations on this issue. Maharaj brings up 2 letters to Hamsadutta and the Treya Rishi. And then he goes on to talk about the letters, Prabhupada's letters, because the GBC used Prabhupada's letters as the praman, as the evidence for making this resolution. And Sivarama Maharaj describes how Srila Prabhupada himself said, don't waste time with my letters. There is an issue here in that Srila Prabhupada said the letters are superfluous, they are redundant, they are unnecessary, they're a waste of time, essentially. However, those statements by Srila Prabhupada is not invalidating those letters, and that is important. Yes, the letters are superfluous, redundant, unnecessary, and a waste of time because everything I have said in my books. It doesn't invalidate the letter. Quite the contrary, it says that my letters reflect what I'm saying in my books. They are equally valid. Superfluous? Yes. Valid? Yes. Redundant? Absolutely. Valid? Still? Yes. Unnecessary? Yes, because the information's in my books. Valid? Also, still, Yes. So we cannot make the leap, in my opinion, from the letters of Srila Prabhupada, which are redundant, superfluous, and unnecessary because we have his books, take the leap from that place to invalidating them. That leap must not be made, cannot be made, in my opinion. Srila Prabhupada wrote those letters to Hamsadutta and Atraya Rishi. Hamsadutta was, at the time, an ISKCON leader, an ISKCON influencer. He went on to become an initiating guru. Atraya Rishi, at the time, was an ISKCON leader. It wasn't a GBC, but it was a senior ISKCON leader. The letters were not to Bhakta Joe and Bhaktin Joanne. They were to thought leaders of ISKCON at the time. They are not invalid. The discussion between Srila Prabhupada and Professor O'Connell is not a discussion or not a flippant phrase or statement Srila Prabhupada makes when he's leaving the Los Angeles temple to get into the car to drive to the airport. He says someone, and on the way of getting into the car, he says, "Oh, yes, women can be gurus." Srila Prabhupada is having a conversation to a thought influencer, a professor. It's valid. We see, and this is what's really important. ISKCON was born from a letter and a conversation between Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Srila Prabhupada. It was a letter and a conversation from which Srila Prabhupada was inspired and ISKCON was born. These are valid instructions. And they do not contradict anything in Srila Prabhupada's books. Let's look at Srila Prabhupada's books. And Sivarama Maharaj rightfully acknowledges and identifies this. Hundreds upon hundreds of statements wherein Srila Prabhupada talks about guruship, for lack of a better term. And persons want to discard those hundreds and hundreds of statements, saying that they are amorphous, they are not explicit, they're not direct, and so on. If we look at the statements, the hundreds and hundreds of statements, they are explicit, they are direct. When Srila Prabhupada talks about the qualifications necessary to be a spiritual master, yes, he doesn't say Pata Pradakshika Guru, Shiksha, Disha. He doesn't differentiate, he doesn't categorize in that way. He simply says the qualifications for being a spiritual master or the qualifications for being a guru. And this he says hundreds of times. Those qualifications have nothing to do with gender. He never brings up gender. Never, not once, ever, when talking about the qualifications of a guru, spiritual master. Also, moreover, when he talks about what it takes to come to those qualifications, to possess those qualifications, he never, not once, ever mentions gender. So the qualifications for being a spiritual master, the qualifications of being a guru, the hundreds of statements regarding that never mention gender. The ability, the process is necessary to reach that level. The hundreds and hundreds of times Prabhupada said that, Prabhupada never mentioned gender. Those statements, all hundreds of them, I would venture into probably near the thousands, all of them are direct, unequivocal, and explicit, and they are redundant again and again and again and again. But what has to be done is we have to take all of that and put it aside so that we can highlight a single specific phrase, a single specific instance, and that is Suniti Dhruva Maharaj, where Srila Prabhupada says Suniti could not be his Diksha Guru because she was a woman, specifically because she was his mother. The only way we can highlight that, we have to highlight it. We have to highlight that statement. We have to bring it up and put it to the front. And that is the only place where we see that explicit mention of gender in this entire issue. If we look at it in that light, we've discarded letters and conversations, and we've discarded the hundreds of direct, explicit descriptions of the qualifications of the guru and how to come to those qualifications. We've put that all aside. The only thing that's left, of course, is that one statement. And what is interesting is that it is a statement between Srila Prabhupada is in the middle of a story of a situation between a mother and son. That's the context of that statement. It doesn't diminish the statement. It doesn't invalidate the statement. Absolutely not. That is the context of the statement, however. And that has to be recognized, especially when we bring back and recognize the hundreds of statements where Srila Prabhupada says, this is the qualifications of a guru, gender's not mentioned, and to meet those qualifications, this is what they are, doesn't mention gender. When you bring all of that together, the conclusion is obvious, that the statement between, the statement of Srila Prabhupada describing a relation between a mother and son, it puts things into relief. We recognize the weight of what's going on. You add the letters that Srila Prabhupada wrote to thought leaders in his society, the scales don't, it speaks for itself. Speaks for itself. Now, we then want to look at what did Srila Prabhupada do? And I think this is absolutely, at Maharaj, many of the things that I agree with. I agree with most of everything he's talking about. Yes, we have to look at what Srila Prabhupada did. We talk about sons and daughters in the letter. We ended up with 12 white men. Why is there a progression between what Srila Prabhupada may have written in a letter earlier on and what he actually did when he selected the gurus in 1977? Srila Prabhupada, yeah, and this is really the icing, one part of the icing on the cake for me, going to what Srila Prabhupada did. And I would like to take a little bit of a detour. We'll come back to that. When Srila Prabhupada came to the United States and he gave initiation to his devotees, he said 64 rounds. That became 32. That became 16. Is the principle chanting 64 rounds now invalid? Absolutely not. The issue is that Prabhupada is dealing with an environment from which he has to extract devotees. These devotees can only do and handle so much. So there was a backtracking of Srila Prabhupada. Yes, 64 rounds, 32 rounds. For crying out loud, 16 rounds. That is the at least minimum. It doesn't invalidate the principle that Srila Prabhupada was aiming for. It doesn't invalidate it. So we want to look at what we call a regression or Srila Prabhupada backtracking. Yes, absolutely. Srila Prabhupada backtracked. Why? The reason why, in my opinion, that Srila Prabhupada chose, or we ended up with 11 men in 1977 is the same reason why there were only men in 1977 on the United States Supreme Court. It is not rocket science. The pool from which Srila Prabhupada is pulling his leaders, his sannyasis, his devotees, his managers, that pool is the culture, the times, deeply, deeply entrenched, mired in racism and sexism. From there, he's pulling devotees who have to make sure ISKCON reaches its 50th anniversary. That's what matters. And that's why we cannot invalidate Srila Prabhupada's letters. Read Prabhupada's letters from 75, 76, 77. He is intimately, deeply concerned about what's going to happen when he leaves. Deeply concerned. when he's pulling devotees, having them becoming initiating spiritual masters, his concern is the 50th, 100th, and the 10,000th year of ISKCON. And we see it all throughout his letters. Valid instructions in his letters. I'm not saying his letters, and this is an aside, I'm not saying his letters to one person is applicable to the next person. Use your common sense. The principles are valid. So yes, Srila Prabhupada backtracked. Absolutely Srila Prabhupada backtracked. We know why Srila Prabhupada backtracked. But the principle, which is stated over and over and over again, hundreds of times in Srila Prabhupada's books, always remained the same. He never backtracked on the principle of what the qualifications of a spiritual master are, nothing to do with gender, and what it takes to meet those qualifications, what those are, never backtracked, never mentioned gender. What he did, he had to backtrack. Because ISKCON would not have lasted a decade if he didn't. That's my opinion. My personal opinion. We know this. This is not hard to understand why Srila Prabhupada, the letter reference, Srila Prabhupada said by 1975, he's going to have his sons and daughters initiating. Good Lord, in 1975. I do not want to tell you where I was in 1975 as a young child in ISKCON. Good Lord, thank God. Let's not go down that road. Of course he backtracked. 1977, no one was ready to be a guru in 1977, and history bears that out. It was not about who's qualified to be a guru in 1977. It was about what's going to make ISKCON last the decade. What's going to let ISKCON see out at least the century. Another thing that really has always solidified my understanding, is the fact that ISKCON was born from a letter and a conversation. Srila Prabhupada got a letter from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Srila Prabhupada had a conversation with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur where no one else was present on the banks of Radhakund. From a conversation and a letter, we got ISKCON. From a conversation and a letter, Srila Prabhupada put a woman on the altar. From a conversation and a letter. Not from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's official writings, official teachings, and certainly not from what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did. It's not there on what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did. You wouldn't know, and the proof of this is that we have the evidence to see it. Not one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's leading disciples, sannyasis, and so on, did or came to the same conclusion that Srila Prabhupada came to. Even those devotees who did go to England and try to establish Krishna consciousness came back and said, not happening. No one got from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's instructions in letters or official writings. No one got from what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did. No one extrapolated from that ISKCON. One person did, Srila Prabhupada. All of that instruction is valid. It's not about why did Srila Prabhupada backtrack. The question is, who's going to get it? That's the issue. Who's going to get it? When I first went to India, we were, I was in Gurukul. I was a young kid. We went with the kitchen in charge to go to cross the river Ganga to Navadvip to buy boga for the Gurukula. And it was kind of like an excursion, an event, so we're all kids going. And I remember we were told, I was fairly new. I'd been in India for about a couple of years now, but I was still young. I did not know much about, certainly anything about shopping. I was like 11, 12 years old. And we were told, my friend and I were told to go and get, to buy some jackfruit for sabji. So we did, myself, my friend. We were all in the market in Navadvip. myself and my friend, we went to the fruit stand, and there was the bananas and all these things. We found the jackfruit, bought the jackfruit. Those of you who know about jackfruit, you already know where the story is going. We went to the fruit vendor, we got the jackfruit, we went back to, very proud, went back to the kitchen manager. Oh, we got the jackfruit, we got the jackfruit. And he said, you idiot. I said, get jackfruit for the subji. We had went to the fruit seller and got a pucka, a ripe jackfruit. You can't put ripe jackfruit in a subji, you blithering idiot. It's funny because, let me tell the story. So then we learned that there's ripe jackfruit, which goes in a fruit salad, and then you have kacha, you have raw jackfruit with which you can make a subji. The key word we heard, me and my knuckle-headed friend of mine, we heard fruit. That's what we heard. We heard fruit. So we went to the fruit seller, got a jackfruit. The statement was for the subji. The operative word was subji. Now, a Bengali boy, one of the other boys would have heard, Krishnadas, go get jackfruit for this afternoon's subji. He would have gone, got a kacha jackfruit, a raw jackfruit, and come away with it. That's what's happening here. The statement is valid. The statement has been done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times throughout Srila Prabhupada's books. The question is, who's listening? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur made the statement hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. It took a conversation and a letter to the right person to get ISKCON. The statement is there. Who's listening? That's the question. Who's listening? I'll tell you who's listening. There's our daughters and granddaughters right now riding their bike, eating ice cream and falling in the mud, coming home crying to mommy and daddy. She's going to get it. She's going to pick up this resolution. She's going to be inspired by the teachings of Srila Prabhupada, and she's going to change the world. She's going to hear what Srila Prabhupada heard. She's going to be to Srila Prabhupada what Srila Prabhupada was to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. She is going to get on a Jaladuta, cross an ocean, and she's going to take Krishna consciousness into the 21st century beyond our possible imagination. We cannot even conceive of what she's going to do. This resolution, and GBCs, they nailed it. They got this one right. This resolution is not about us. This resolution is going to change the face of the world. They got this one right. I won't talk about their explanation of it. That should be shredded. The explanation is simple. What they should have done is said, we're going to have female Diksha Gurus. If you need to understand why, read Srila Prabhupada's books. That's it. This is a 2-sentence resolution. The explanation is 1 sentence, in my opinion. A number of other things I also agree with Maharaj is when he talks about repercussions. He's absolutely correct. When Maharaj talks about repercussions, he hits the nail on the head. We also have to talk about implementation, and Maharaj touches on that as well. Sivarama Swami, brilliantly slow. Implementation, messy. Oh God, it's going to be messy. Good Lord, it is going to be messy. But in my opinion, and from my perspective, what really has to be watched is this idea that this can be imposed upon a culture. We have to make sure, and we have to guard against, as I mentioned in the beginning, labeling, tarring, and feathering. We have to guard against Western cultural privilege to think that this is the resolution, we're going to force this upon your culture. That has to stop. This Western cultural supremacy, this idea, this mentality that Western culture is the preeminent culture, this privileged thinking that Western culture is the culture that should overwhelm or should take precedence over all other cultures. That is the most intellectually, culturally arrogant mind frame that we could possibly have, period, but especially in dealing with this particular issue within ISKCON. Western culture, as Gandhi said, is a good idea, but Western culture is about 3 minutes old. Yet we have this mentality of cultural superiority, that this is what we believe, and we're going to foist it upon another culture that is 5,000 years old. And then we demean that culture. We disrespect that culture. We disrespect the people who, their very culture is their identity for generations. That level of arrogance has to stop. Has to stop. This issue, when it is talked about in India, for India, it has to be talked about in India by Indian devotees. That's it. They come up with implementation of this. Otherwise, it is just white or Western cultural privilege, arrogance. It's cultural colonialism all over again. And it completely muddies the water. And Srila Prabhupada didn't do that when he came to the United States. He recognized American culture. All he did was say, add Krishna. The identity, the cultural identity of what America was, for lack of a better term, cultural identity for America, he did not invalidate people's identification with that. He said, sure, add Krishna. He talked about giving up those things which are detrimental to your well-being. They may have seemed to have had a cultural flavor, pun intended, because I'm talking about prasadam, right? But the issue is, don't eat meat. The issue is not only drink dal. Srila Prabhupada did not impose cultural issues as a necessity. He talked about the principle. Now, this is not to go off into a tangent on Krishna West, because that is a discussion, and maybe I'll talk about that, my own opinions of that. I think Krishna West is doing good, but their messaging could be better. The point I'm trying to make is, the principle is set by Srila Prabhupada. It's throughout his books, hundreds of times. They are direct. It is clear as a bell. The letters echo what's in his books and are not needed because it's in his books. Nothing more needs to be said. Make the resolution. The explanation is read Prabhupada's books. Implementation, leave it to India. The conversation is in India, for Indians, by Indian devotees. We have to have the humility, the trust, the respect to honor that. That is absolutely necessary. Necessary not only for the growth of ISKCON and this particular issue, but it's necessary for individual spiritual development. Personal, cultural humility in this regard. Respect of a 5,000-year-old culture that is ingrained in their identity for millennia. Whereas Western culture can be measured in minutes. Another thing I want to agree with on Maharaj, and as you can see, I agree with much of what he's talking about, most of what he's talking about. Another thing that I agree with in Maharaj's presentation is that he talks about this is an unsafe proposition. This is or has monumental, unforeseen, unpredictable consequences. He's absolutely correct. At 100% correct. Doing this, it is not the safe thing to do. I don't mean it's dangerous. I don't see it as harmful. This is not harmful. In the sense that it is no more harmful to Krishna consciousness than Srila Prabhupada getting on the Jaladuta and going to New York was harmful to Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada doing that temporarily left behind the Gaudiya Math. It took them some time to catch up and to see the principle of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's teachings. So there's no harm, but it's unsafe. If you want comfort, this is not the road you want to go down. That I absolutely 100 agree with Maharaj. Going down the female Diksha Guru road is ISKCON getting on the Jaladuta, suffering 2 heart attacks, going across an abyss, ending up in a place that we have no frame of reference other than Srila Prabhupada's instructions. That's all we have. Everything going forward is going to be an arid, alien, hostile environment going down this road. That I absolutely agree. And my answer to that is yes. So, yes. Srila Prabhupada, and this is when we talk about what did Srila Prabhupada do? Srila Prabhupada got on a bloody boat. That's what he did. He got on the boat. He had the 2 heart attacks. He crossed an abyss. He ended up in a hostile environment, alone, by himself, and he had nothing but a letter and a conversation. Hari Hari.